All right, so we'll get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm John Land, Chief Advocacy Officer at Vantage Circle, and I'm thrilled to for you to join us today to discuss the future of work, building a resilient and engaged workforce in the era of global trade wars. Let's be honest, where we are right now. We're living through a period where a single trade policy announcement can reshape entire industries overnight, where supply chains that took decades to build can be disrupted in months, where talent strategies that work beautifully in globalized world suddenly need complete reimagining. At the center of all this turbulence, our people, the workforce we're responsible for leading, engaging, and protecting through unprecedented uncertainty. As someone who's been on both sides of the equation, from my early days as a CHRO navigating corporate transformations, to my time as a partner at Mercer helping global clients redesign their workforce strategies, to now championing employee engagement at Vantage Circle, I can tell you that what we're facing today isn't just another business cycle. This is a fundamental reshaping of how we think about work itself. Put on top of that, we're also dealing with the kind of introduction of AI as another component of the workforce. Today, we're not going to give you theoretical frameworks or abstract concepts. We're here to explore real, actionable strategy from two HR leaders who've actually navigated through choppy waters and delivered measurable results while doing it. Let me introduce our speakers. Atulya Gosmani joins us as a seasoned global HR leader who builds workforce strategies across some of the world's most complex business environments. From P&G to General Mills, Atulya has led HR transformation spanning fast-moving consumer goods, chemicals, and manufacturing industries that are right at this epicenter of today's trade tensions. He's navigated everything from high-growth markets to complete business turnarounds, and he's done it while building multicultural teams across continents. Tom Ellis brings over 2 decades of transforming HR strategies into competitive advantages, most recently as Vice President of Total Rewards at a large healthcare system, Advent Health, one of the nation's largest with over 100,000 employees. But that's what makes Tom's perspective especially valuable today. He established HR functions in China, expanded services across Germany, Europe, and Japan, and consistently delivered measurable results, including over 100 million in annual savings through data-driven innovations. He knows what it takes to make global HR work, even when the rules keep changing. Over the next 45 minutes, we'll explore some 4 critical areas: strategic workforce planning, building people-first resiliency without compromising business results, talent strategies that transcend trade barriers, and recognition as a tool for sustaining engagement when everything feels uncertain. So let's dive in, because the future of work isn't something that's happening to us. It's something we're actively building one strategic decision at a time. Gentlemen, really happy to have you on this webcast today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So given the 2 of yours experience across different continents and different industries, how are trade wars and economic nationalism reshaping the fundamental workforce challenges leaders are facing today in 2025? I'll let either one of you jump into that one first.
Why don't you take it, Atulya?
Sure. So I think, thanks so much. I think it's a very apt topic. And, as I was diving into this conversation and saw the interaction flow, this is a very different conversation and, very interesting questions to be discussed today. I think the first thing it has done is it's created a lot of chaos globally, because there's a lot of uncertainty around how is business actually going to react to these kind of changes, because these changes are so dynamic, and every other day there is a very different announcement on a tariff, and different markets are getting impacted differently, and we don't know how much would be the magnitude of impact, because there's so much of back and forth on what would be the actual percentage eventually. So I think it is certainly building some uncertainty to begin with. I think the straightforward impact that I see here, which in any case would happen, is on the cost of goods sold, or the COGS as you call it, which essentially puts pressure on the margins of companies, as they operate in different markets. And today, if I just have to take one cooked up example of, say, a company who manufactures cornflakes in US is dependent on Canada for raw material. And if the tariffs are going to be high there, then there's a very clear pressure on margin, right? Because what they're going to sell is the margins are going to get impacted from whatever is coming from that country. So I think the point number one, which companies are trying to grapple with right now on the business side of it, is the survival. And in some cases, if these tariffs are of that extent, then potentially what we are saying is that the business itself is unviable, right? So how do we fight for survival right now, and how do we get the structure right in terms of our labor cost, or how do we get it right in terms of our synergies on gross margins, is something which is the first thing which typically companies are looking at.
Yeah.
So I think one thing which has started to happen, which I'm seeing as a part of this whole development, is companies can't have a very rigid strategy, right? So whether it's the workforce strategy, or whether it's anything within that, whether it's strategic workforce planning, or how you look at compensations, how do you look at engagement, I think everything is going to take a very different twist, to the whole tale here. And it's going to be a lot of action around restructures here, because companies are going to evaluate the way they operate, because today what you have in your country may not exist a year down the line to a large extent, because you may look at an offshore, nearshore, friendshore, the new word, which has come in. And these three things may happen. There could be a lot of build, borrow, buy, bought, right? So, as you think about the workforce, one-way strategy may not happen. So things may change there as well. And I think the companies will look at this whole scenario in a very real-time basis, right? So I know we are going to talk about SWP, or strategic workforce planning, but can we really plan for next 3 years is the question in the current scenario. I think the question to ask is how much real-time reaction and capacity and capability and agility. I think these are the three words which stay in my mind. And the ones who will react fast, move fast, change fast. And I love the word talent liquidity. Companies who are going to bring in the talent liquidity are going to be the ones who will survive this whole chaos. And I think it's a true test of values of the company, because you see a lot of it happening in the good times. But when the times become challenging, I think that's when they get tested a lot. And we'll talk about some examples probably in the subsequent questions as we get to that. But I think in a nutshell, it can throw many challenges, right? From gross margins to cost of labor in certain places. Assume you have to start a local factory in US from a market like India. Is that cost really sustainable? The cost could be 3x of what you do in India. So there could be many challenges as things unfold, and companies will have to really pivot and look at things very differently from here on.
Yeah, really insightful. Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
Just that, I think in healthcare and life sciences, the trade tensions create unique workforce pressures. I think Atula did a wonderful job of covering, while the impacts may be slightly different, we're all feeling the impact. Medical device tariffs affect our supply chains. More critically, visa restrictions, right, are impacting our ability to recruit international talent. Folks may not realize this, but many healthcare systems, especially the larger ones, we're sourcing nurses from the Philippines. We have IT talent in India. We've got customer service and call centers in Mexico and in the Philippines as well. And so these things do have a direct impact on what you would typically think as a domestic industry. When I was at the Jackson Laboratory, fondly referred to as JAX, a significant percentage of our PhD level researchers and their support teams were international. So these changes, particularly for resources that are really irreplaceable, you may only have a handful of people in the world that do this type of work, especially related to things like genomics, genetics, disease research, are really impacted by this disruption. And so we're really starting to see this shift from global talent optimization to more workforce localization strategies. So how do we, like a supply chain, how do we disruption proof the talent pipeline in ways that we haven't historically considered? If you had IT talent several years ago in Ukraine, which was next to India, probably number 2 in the world, you had to very quickly rethink how you were going to handle that. How did you get the people out? How did you pivot to a new source of talent? When the war started, and so it's presenting challenges that we've not dealt with historically, and I think the velocity of those challenges is certainly higher than it's ever been.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think you both bring up some great points here, and the one that kind of really actually popped out to me a little bit, Atuya, was like, is SPO, strategic workforce planning, really a 3-year horizon anymore? And that just was like, I just felt like a cold glass of water in my face, right, on that. And so, speaking of that, like, let's talk about what do we think the definition is of strategic workforce planning is today, right? Or, with all this uncertainty, like, how are we to do that, right? And is it a Sisyphean task? I guess it would be the question I'd throw out there.
Yeah, I think it's changed dramatically, John.
Yeah.
I think we've really pivoted from the focus on addressing shortages and future-proofing, talent pipelines and the like, to really adding in this surge capacity and redundancy across multiple dimensions. So again, in my background, health systems and other places are now modeling, surge capacity. How do we deploy our workforce? So beyond the tariffs, we had Hurricane Helene, natural disasters and the like are impacting businesses, and the need to be able to deploy talent quickly and to have them be completely mobile, or I'm going to steal Atuya's word, liquidity, right? To have that liquidity, which I like that a lot, Atuya.
Yeah.
I'll definitely steal that from you. Has become really mission critical to organizations to be able to navigate this environment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with that too, right? Like, just Tom, what you were mentioning, right, around the liquidity, we used to not worry about borders when it came to liquidity, or it was less of an issue, right? Now today, with the economic nationalism, a lot of it, let's be frank, being kind of kicked off by the United States, right, and the trade wars that we've really initiated. They're really impacting, right? They're impactful because now you've, where you could go to the Philippines for healthcare or to, offshoring. Now we have to look at friendshoring, right? I love that term too. Is really taking us outside kind of the bounds that we've had to think to, maybe in our lifetime. So, before globalization happened, maybe that was something that was more in the thing. But then again, before globalization, there wasn't all this as much interconnectedness between nations, especially when it came to economics, economic growth. Well, with that, Atuya, with you've navigated a lot of different situations, right? High growth markets, business turnarounds, through multiple different industries. With the trade wars suddenly shifting the manufacturing and supply chains, what have you seen kind of as the workforce agility strategies that are being leaned into today?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I'll just react to the SWP part and then come to the specific answer on this one. I think companies are looking at it from two perspectives. So, what is my short-term strategy, let's say for next 1 year on build, borrow, buy, bought, as I called it out, right? So no more the conversation is only about headcount planning. So that's the change in the narrative, right? Earlier it used to be, let's plan for headcount. Now you are actually planning for capabilities. And you're saying that, hey, while I'm looking at a 1 year down the line plan or a 2 year plan. What can I do from my country? What can I do from elsewhere? That's why you see a lot of conversation today happening on the GCCs, where companies want to leverage the efficiency and, of course, control on processes. And India right now is a booming market for GCCs, right? I can tell you, being part of one of the GCCs and then seeing the whole growth across, I think every enterprise is taking a step back to say that how can we look at better efficiencies? And that has not become a choice anymore. I think it's a must-have, business survival toolkit right now. And that's one thing which companies are looking at it very differently. The second piece to that, I feel, is also building a very future fit, resilient organization. So you're not really talking about headcounts. You are saying, what can I build from within? What is my talent which I need to have internally? Example could be R&D. It could be something else. What are the skills and capabilities I need to build inside? What are the artificial intelligence or the technology possibilities for me to streamline certain things, which is where your AI comes into picture. And I think there's a heavy lifting happening on contingent workforce as well. And I see organizations now taking a step back to say that, hey, is there an opportunity to consolidate globally on the contingent workforce model or the way I operate across multiple vendors across like 100 countries? Can I consolidate things and have better efficiency? So I think right now the conversation is around how do I become more and more efficient, right? So that's the first thing which in the model of discussion itself is changing right now. I think the second piece is companies are trying to define what are my critical roles, what kind of strategic impact, what kind of value creation do they bring, and how can I ring fence that kind of talent? Because when these kind of changes are happening, the easiest thing that can happen is, so much of chaos, you lose top talent, which no organization wants to have, in this kind of scenario. Third thing which I'm starting to see a lot is focus on skill-based growth of people, because while all this is happening, skills are becoming equally important. And at least in the last 2 decades, I never saw in the FMCG space or some of the other traditional manufacturing setups, it had been around in technology, and you would know that there was a very clear tracking of skills and proficiency levels. Today, organizations have started using upskilling much more deliberately, right? So they are starting to say, not only the headcount, not only the capabilities, but is my organization actually future ready? And what do I need to do to get there? What are the skills which I need to do? Let's say if I have to set up a factory of the future, do I really have the skills or the people who can take me there, right? And so that's where build, borrow, buy, right? So I'm going to buy certain talent, I'm going to build certain talent, I'm going to bought certain things, I'm going to borrow certain things, which is your contingent workforce. So I think that's the mental model which companies are bringing quite effectively. And I don't think we were ever thinking about geopolitics when we were doing all this planning. So today the narrative is so much shifted on geopolitics that, hey, if I do this, what is the impact of something happening in a China or something happening in a India or something happening in a Mexico? Because all these 3 markets can offer a very different advantage, right? So one is a low-cost manufacturer, one is your GCC hub, right? So which is India. Mexico could be a very different, ball game, and depends on what enterprise, what kind of businesses, what kind of models we are talking. And talent has to be ring fenced everywhere. Talent, liquidity, again, as we both shared the same context. So I think those things will become pretty important in the conversation. So it's going to be, I would say, a very real-time reaction to all the things. And, you've got to really move very fast, thinking of all these aspects to be future ready. And that's what typically high growth organizations are doing right now. And I'm seeing this happening in pharma, healthcare. I can talk about any industry because sitting in India, I can tell you, today we have about 1,700 GCCs in India, and this number is going to be a staggering 2,100 by 2030. So you can imagine the amount of global capability centers which are going to come up in India. So every time you're thinking SWP or call it holistic workforce planning, you are going to look at value creation from markets who can give you that advantage. And I can see that happening across industries right now.
Yeah, great. Yeah. The global capability centers are really starting to take off, like you said. I've gotten calls like India is really dominant in that right now, right? And it has, you know, a workforce or a population that can really help with that quite a bit. You know, I've gotten calls from folks in the Philippines lately saying that they're starting, you know, that the Philippines is trying to get into the GCC game. So, yeah. Right, but it's a definitely something that's going to be more and more of a game changer. Shifting about strategic workforce planning a little bit here, Tom. You know, you've done a lot of data-driven HR approaches. You know, how do you think we're going to have to balance the need for agile workforce planning with ROI demands that our executives, you know, our peers in the C-suite are looking for, especially during kind of these really uncertain times? Do you have a thought on that?
I do. It's a good question, and I think organizations are wrestling with it. And we've just touched on the surface about agentic AI, and so we're going to need to dig into that a little bit, because that has a significant impact. Even though we're just on the leading edge of it, you know, the ability to take AI beyond chatbots and to a place where it can actually reach out through APIs, grab data, and actually perform work is coming. Now, depending on whether you listen to Sam Altman or, you know, some other thought leader, it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. So we need to be thinking about it now and planning for it now and implementing it, you know, as we can. But back to your original question, you know, every organization says talent, right? People are number one resource, right? And they all believe that when they say it, and I think for good reason, right? People would make the engine run. If that's true, then the data that's appended to the people in our organizations is just as important. And so building out things like a data warehouse where we not only look at, for example, medical claims data, but we're looking at the HR demographic data. We're looking at what's happened in employee health. We're looking at what's happened with workers' compensation. We've pulled in data feeds, you know, from anything that touches population health, allows us to get a very clear picture and to make programmatic interventions that are based on data. Historically, organizations have not been able to go to that level of depth, and maybe there's been some reticence to invest in doing that because maybe your finance folks or your leaders don't see the value. This is where I think the tension between cost and value really becomes important, because when you have that data, you can make very meaningful decisions. You can effectively measure the programmatic interventions that you have launched, and you can do it in a much more of a real-time fashion. And I think coupled with that, organizations, particularly the HR operation, really trying to get to a place where they can measure and understand when things aren't working, pivot away from that quickly, and move to something that's going to be more effective. And again, the way that you analyze that, measure it, is through data. And, you know, certainly Workday and Oracle and, you know, all the companies that are in that Gartner Magic Quadrant, right, in the upper right quadrant, that we know are the most popular and the most effective, they have, you know, native AI, and they certainly have a lot of value, right? They add a lot of value to the organization. But we're coming into an environment where, again, agentic AI and some of these other things are going to make all of that data more important, and the data structure and how we manage it is more important. And historically, at least in the places that I've been, oftentimes HR data was, okay, we're going to do government reporting, you know, we're going to do these other things that we have to do, but it was more an afterthought. And now we're at a place where that can no longer be the case. That data really has to drive decision-making and measurement of the things that we're trying to do around people.
Yeah, that's definitely right. I see that, right, that the need for better, more data around our people is increasing, which, you know, when we talk about the 4 B's, like the build, buy, bot, borrow, like, you know, it makes me think about, well, what do we do around the borrow side, right? And can we, right? You know, I guess that will really be something that we look into, as well as, you know, as we get better at really understanding the skills, like Atuya, I think you brought up, like we've been really good at skills around IT. Yeah. It doesn't, like, we haven't been good around, and also credentialing, right? Like those jobs like Tom in healthcare where you have to have a credential, but some of those other skills, and probably most organizations haven't really, I haven't seen a really great job at them really capturing skills data yet. And, we've all been talking about it, but I think the urgency of that is coming a lot quicker. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that, John. I think that, again, you're seeing organizations needing and wanting to move in that direction. But even the technologies, if you think about a Workday or an Oracle, the Skills Cloud is, self-reported. And so how do, organizations trying to figure out how they capture it, utilize that data. And then on the compensation side, how you use that, in pay programs, how you use that in hiring in a way that is, productive and helpful, and creates an environment where you can support some of what we've talked about, not only from an ROI perspective, but the deployment when you have disruption in your labor market. So if you're moving from folks in India, something's happened there, and we've got to now have staff that can do that work in the US, for example. That skills-based approach is critical to being able to do that and do it well.
Yeah, and I agree with Tom. I think this whole conversation is a very long journey, actually, because today, if you look at the data itself, we don't have the data of skill gaps, especially if I'm talking about many industries, minus technology, where you may still have it. And how do you really know where do people stand in terms of proficiency? So it's a long journey, right? So A, the skills, B, where do they stand? And then the whole linkage around rewards and probably promotions linked with pay, because skills, which has never been a conversation. And I think these change in narratives probably will happen over a period of time, because I remember one of the sessions in my recent past where the topic came on around skill-based promotions and skill-based pay, because today L&D is still seen as a good to have. Hey, I go out, I do a training program, I come back and nothing changes, right? A lot of times. So those narratives are going to shift a lot in the coming days. And upskilling may not be company's business only. It may become a much more a necessity for an individual versus, a company-driven program to say that, hey, you need to upskill. So that's how I see the future unfolding.
Yeah. When I was at Mercer, we were talking a lot about skills, right? And I put on my old CHRO hat, and I'd be like, yeah, I can put in a skills taxonomy. I can attach skills to jobs, right, or to projects or whatever. Both pretty. I mean, a lot of work, but doable, right? I can ask people what their skills are, right, or ask people around them to say what are their colleagues' skills are. The real hard part to me was like, what is their actual skill proficiency level? Because and I use this example a lot. I say, somebody asks me how I am at project management, I say I'm great at it, and then they lean over to Tom. They go, Tom, you've worked with John. How good is John at project management? And he's like, John's really not that good, right? Or right, it's the other way around. Like, Tom just saw me do it once and I did it really well, but the other 9 out of 10 times I did it terribly. So how can we actually get to that versus then I'm like, oh my gosh, am I going to have to give evaluations all the time? And how unattainable that, at least in my mind as a CHRO, would be from an effort as well as an ROI, like evaluating somebody's skills over and over and over again. So anyway,
Agree 100%. I think that the measurement of competencies, which are different than skills, and the skills that append to them, right? So again, I'm a tech guy, so I think in tables and all of that. How you measure that and how that, as a practical matter, influences how you set somebody in a salary range, how you make determinations to promote them, and all that is not an easy thing to figure out.
Yeah.
And that's where I think organizations are really, you see the tension. They know they want to go there. They know they have to go there, but the how to get there, I think, is a real challenge.
And doesn't it need to shift our HR mindsets from these cyclical to more real time? Like, again, if these things are happening, like, why are they happening in annual cycles, right? Like that whole idea of the annual performance review, the annual merit cycle, like a lot of those things that we've been we as HR professionals have kind of structured how we do things, I feel is really getting outdated pretty quickly.
For sure. I think giving the leadership, John, tools to be able to do that in an environment where, so remember, the reason why we went to things like focal cycles and all of that was to create space for leaders to be able to manage all the stuff they had to manage. So now you've got to step back and say, okay, what is really important for the leaders' competency, right, and skill, and then they should spend their time doing that and not maybe doing this other stuff. And then you need to apply the right tools and equip them with the right knowledge to be able to
do that. Cool. Let's flip it a little bit into kind of what I call people first resilience, right? So we've talked about strategic workforce planning, but Atuya, you've done a lot around diversity, inclusion, and organizational cross transformation. And in your view, what does people first actually mean when organizations are making tough business decisions during economic uncertainty like we're facing today?
Yeah, and the reality of today is org restructuring is a reality, and especially if I think about the FMCG space, or if I think about manufacturing in general, depending on which part of the world you are sitting in, there is a lot of pressure on volume growth, and companies are not necessarily growing that fast the way they used to go. And you do hear stories around consumption patterns changing, a lot of competition from private labels, a lot of new players coming in the market. So the reality, the world is not the same, right? And we can debate and say, have a coffee conversation that it's cyclical. Yes, of course, everything could be cyclical, but the reality is which part of the cycle we are sitting in. And I think the part of the cycle that you have today is more around companies trying to be more cost efficient, trying to be more tuned to bring better synergies on cost and all these margins and all these pieces. So I think org restructure is one major part of it. And I call it that transparency over spin. Okay. Yeah. So that's, and the rules of the games are not going to change, whether it's tariff related changes happening, or if it is related to COVID, or if it is related to any other geopolitical situation or a business situation. I think rules of the game to handle your talent is still the same. They don't really change, right? So first thing itself is the transparency part of it. And most of the organizations who've done a good job there would focus a lot on being very proactive, right? So if we anticipate the year to look not so great, I think the narrative is going to build around that. So it's not going to be a conversation which will come as a surprise. And typically, you would explain the why. So I think that's the first thing which the organization would do to manage the workforce, that, hey, this is what it is out there. This is information for you. This is facts. This is our outlook. This is what we're trying for.
Yeah.
And right. So I think those leadership transparent conversations coming from the top, and of course, town halls have to be super transparent to, get that message going with the right, with the organization. I think what is important during this whole, because what happens typically is when we are sitting in this situation, there's a lot of negative. And sometimes we are talking so much about what is going to change that we stop thinking about what is not going to change, right? What is not going to change is our investment in top talent. What is not going to change our investment in the culture, right? So what are those pieces which we still need to reinforce to the people and say that this is extremely important for us, and we continue to do that. Anything like a talent management process, which has your top talent, or which has some seriously capable talent, which is your future for the organization. You got to ring fence that around this period. The third piece is there are certain core aspects to the organization which is part of your strategy. So think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now you're not going to take a 360-degree turn and say, I'm not going to be a diverse or a equity based or driven or a inclusive organization. So those, and people are going to watch out for all these things when these changes are happening, on how you're walking the talk. And one big watch out I would call out here is that there should not be a specific group which we are targeting when we are making these restructures or making these kind of changes, because that's going to get noticed, right? So how are we actually looking at the whole workforce distribution as we look at various changes in the operating model. It could be org design, it could be transitions. I think having that fair distribution from a DEI perspective is very, very important in my view, because that's a core to many organizations, especially if you're looking at foreign multinationals or global multinationals. That's a big one. And I think the third one is dignity of employees, because the reality is the talent transformation or the restructures are going to be part of it. How they get handled with dignity, and how do they get handled with all the necessary support. It could be outplacements, it could be giving enough time, it could be severance packages, it could be multiple things, right? How do you help people get upskilled? I think all these things will become important for the organization to really.
Oh, I think he froze up.
He did.
Yeah. Give it a second. Hey, Atuya, you froze up there on us a tiny bit.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. I think that's we can hear you now. Why don't we? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So people first. I think that's going to be important, and while business is going to be critical, I think it's the tightrope walk. So how do you balance it out between the two with all the three things that I spoke of? I don't think the rules of the game are going to change. They are still the same basic stuff which organizations have to get right.
Great. Terrific. Thanks. Tom, putting a little bit of more of a total rewards and a wellness spin on it, right? Yeah, you've gotten really deep into wellness programs and health solutions. How do you build organizational resilience without burning out your workforce? Especially when asking them to be more agile and adaptable, right? I just think we've been asking from people a lot, right? And how can we support them with this ask?
Yeah, I think you're right, John. It starts out with the acknowledgement that our team members have been and continue to operate at a very high level of stress, right? Particularly in healthcare, the nature of the job, but just the fact that we really still have a lot of shortages in the nursing area as well as in the physician side. And so resilience building, from my perspective, really needs to focus on sustainable capacity rather than continuing to ask more from people. And in order to do that, you've got to build in the support structures so that they feel supported, that there's transparency around the mechanisms to support them, and that they clearly understand the work they're doing and how that fits into the mission. So clinical surge protocols are something that you see in healthcare quite more frequently now, I would say, than in the past, where you temporarily increase support resources while reducing non-essential activities during high pressure periods. And the key there is reducing non-essential high pressure periods. I think, again, we've come historically from a place where it's like, we're just going to keep adding. And this is true, by the way, not just for the clinicians, but I think the back office folks have felt this. And we see this in our engagement surveys. Very interesting lately. Just recently, probably a couple of days ago, a colleague of mine that does a lot of deep kind of data dives into engagement was sharing some data with me, and it really showed, on one hand, this is what the team members, the employees, are saying about their level of engagement. This is what senior C-suite leaders think their engagement is, and there's a 25% difference between those two. And so clearly there's a gap there, right? So where's the value proposition? Again, transparency. This is where recognition comes in. I think the way that we do recognition and the frequency of recognition we need to step our game up in that area when we're going through, these very high intense crises. And again, the support. If I think back to COVID, and I think about my time at the Jackson Laboratory, right? We enhanced and augmented our leave programs. We provided support, in California, where we had operations in and around Sacramento. The schools were closing and folks didn't have daycare. So we moved quickly to establish partnerships. Now, this was all done in real time. Ideally, you'd like to have those things in place before those things happen, so you can just execute against whatever the situation is now. It's tariffs and economic uncertainty. But I think the support and rewards and recognition really important. And so we should take those lessons we learned during COVID and apply those now. And so you started to see this. One of the things I was very proud of, that we did in this particular case, we rolled out a very comprehensive mental health program that was more than just an EAP, right? It was an all-in program. It cost the organization, a bit of money to do that, right? And so there was a process that we needed to undertake, that I needed to lead, to really help the organization understand, again, the value of having this in place versus just the cost to do it. And we were able to do that. We were able to put the math together and make it work for finance and everybody else. And our employees, whether they use that service or not, there starts to be a story being told corporately about the organization is willing and able to do these things. And that enables me, equips me to be able to then do the things I need to do when we're facing, a COVID situation, or a situation where we need to deploy pieces of our, or parts of our groups of our workforce, rapid response teams to different places in the U.S. or outside of the U.S. And so I think that's it. I mean, the leading organizations also, and I will wrap up on this point, have developed systems to track sustainable performance indicators. So again, they're afterwards, they're going back and measuring work intensity levels, emotional exhaustion scores, recovery time between high intensity periods. And then that data is being used to make informed decisions about future programmatic interventions and support mechanisms. So they have something they can pull off shelf, so to speak.
Yeah, it's terrific. I'm just looking at the time here, and gosh, I wish we had more time to really dive into some more of these areas. And I'm sure I don't know about you two, but the time's been just flown by already for this conversation. Thank you for that. So I want to just kind of get your thoughts a little bit about that. You both have kind of, when we talk about the talent strategy, I think we've hit on this a little bit. And Atuya, especially you with the GCCs, the Global Capability Centers, and the Greenfield projects that you've done, how should organizations, and you've done this, right? Well, standing up a GCC, that's a pretty, I've never done it, but I heard it's a pretty rapid event, right? To do that. Like, if people need to kind of move more to friend shores versus offshore, right, for a GCC, how would they go about kind of rapidly rebuilding a talent in a new market? Or how would you go about it?
So I think it's the conversation here is a lot these days about having hubs of talent, right? So different hubs, and typically all eggs in one basket is not the right approach. So like, for example, imagine a $50 billion company based out of US having one GCC in India. That's a bad strategy, because there is a very clear risk. Of course, there are business reasons around it, but there could be a huge dependency on talent, on cost, on multiple things, because that's the value creation engine for the enterprise at the end of the day. That's the whole purpose of having the GCC in, let's say, that's a cooked up example of India. So typically, I think the approach which companies are now starting to look at is, how do you distribute your risks and say, can I have multiple talent hubs? Like, for example, supply chain is a very different ball game. So supply chain could be a very different hub operating in a market where you have talent for supply chain, which is your complete make, plan, shift, logistics, sourcing, etc., right? Whereas shared services is a very different skill set, which is one major component of your GCC, which is pure play finance shared services, HR shared services, payroll operations. Maybe they can operate from Manila, which is where you have a lot of skills today, or it can operate from a Costa Rica, which is on the Latin side of it, language, and of course you have shared services capability. Technology could be an India play. distributed to multiple markets. Not necessarily everything comes to India, but still stays in certain critical markets, but some part of it comes to India because of talent and various other factors. So I think two approaches, John, to your question. So one, GCCs are trying to distribute one core center and multiple hubs in different parts of the world, different geographies. So you may have something in a Warsaw in Poland, you may have something in a Budapest, you may have something in a Costa Rica, you may have something in Manila, you may have something in India, right? So that's one model. The second model is break down the capabilities. So GCC is a mix of shared services, supply chain, strategy, intelligence. It could be analytics, it could be R&D services, it could be something else. So can we break down those capabilities and try and distribute those risks depending on the skills? And friend shore, near shore, as that's a very nice word, friend shore. So what are those countries which can be economically viable, but at the same time, I don't run the risk of geopolitics, right? So for example, if I'm a GCC in China, I may not set up something in Taiwan, right? Or if so you may want to be very careful of how the geopolitics and the friend shoring works here, which never used to be the case earlier. I think earlier it was pure play on the cost front, right? So I think the first thing is to distribute. I think the major component to your question would be to distribute the risks as you're looking at the GCCs, because they have become a value creation engine, and the narrative has shifted off completely, right? So these were seen as low-cost centers, the work that I don't want to do in US or in Europe or in the enterprise. Let me pass it on to these countries and they'll do it for me. Today, the narrative is very different. I'm doing it because it's a need. And I'm not only doing what I don't want to do, I'm actually studying the entire value chain and the process and sitting with some of the consultants to really understand on, what kind of work can be actually taken out from the enterprise to drive more efficiencies, and then create the whole ecosystem of talent. And this is not necessarily low-cost talent. So one big change with the tariffs, if I may add, cost of labor in markets where you have these GCCs is increasing year on year, because imagine the kind of talent you need for technology is going to be AI, ML, enterprise architecture, cybersecurity. Those kind of talent don't come cheap, right? So those are niche skills, hot skills. They get separate bonuses to do the jobs. So I think the whole dynamic is shifting. Long story short, not all eggs in one basket. I think it has to be distributed.
Okay, great. Really appreciate that perspective. Tom, I'm gonna you hit on recognition a little bit earlier. You kind of mentioned it, so maybe this is both for you. But Tom, if you could start out, like as you think about kind of building resilience, building capabilities, we're seeing a real fundamental shift in the use of recognition, right? What's one recognition strategy that's been proven especially effective for you in sustaining engagement, and especially right in our world of more distributed and hybrid workforces? Also with economic and or geopolitical, let's call it geopolitical uncertainty, right? Because that's really what it's that's what we're dealing with today.
Yeah, I'd preface this by saying I think recognition is one of those things that rolls off the tongue easy, but is really largely understood and largely underdeployed by many organizations, including many of the ones I've been in. I would say this spans industries, but specific to healthcare, some of the most effective recognition strategies that I've seen are those that create what I'll refer to as impact visibility. So market-leading organizations create detailed stories that focus on how individual adaptations, so in this case, flexibility, all the things we've been talking about around where we are and need to go from a labor market perspective, directly affected in the case of healthcare patient outcomes. In a manufacturing operation, it would be different, but same concept. Or in the case of research breakthroughs. So if supply chain issues, for example, delayed lab equipment, and this is a real example from Jax, we highlight not just the researcher, right, who found alternative methods, but the facilities team member who modified the lab spaces, the procurement specialist, right, who helped to identify new vendors, and these stories get shared across the entire system, right? And we make a big deal of it. Now, there are cultural influences depending on where people are as to how they like this done. So how it can be done can be different, right, from market to market. But the concept of storytelling and sharing these across the system to demonstrate that problem solving, adaptability directly serve the mission and how they serve the mission, and that this flexibility during these disruptions isn't just helping the organization, it's advancing fill in the blank, patient care, our research aims, all of those sort of things, and really highlights the organization values this and values the people that bring these types of skills and willingness to the table.
Great. Thanks, Tom. How about you, Atuya? What have you seen work well from kind of recognition and, helping through turbulence and keeping workforces engaged?
Very similar to Tom. I think he's covered it very well. And I think it's story-based is what resonates with people. And I don't think it's just about good job done kind of recognition. I think there has to be a very clear connection with what the values of the organization are. And more I'm seeing that since the COVID days, that the purpose is the what, value is the how, and to get to those values is how do you reinforce it through the recognition. And typically in these kind of scenarios, your values will be tested the most, right? For example, I give you a very real example of one organization I used to work for. One of the values which was crafted was always human. So that's the value. And during COVID, the sanitation was happening. You remember those days, we had to make sure that all the places are cleared out. This was, by the way, a crop protection or an agrochemical company that I was working in that time. And they actually used to supply the large machines, equipments to the farmers to spray pesticides or to spray chemicals so that the food is protected. But guess what? During COVID, those machines were actually supplied to the local municipality to actually clean up the entire roads and a lot of work which happened within the city. And the team that did that was recognized under the ambit of always human or the value which we lived. Now, remember, when this story gets broadcasted to the larger organization, the value gets reinforced. People understand what the value means versus the verbatim, because I don't think any of us remember those verbatims. Nobody registers those verbatims as they come out. Even the CEO or the board would not know that. But the moment it connects with the storyline that I just spoke of, we'll remember it for a decade and say that, hey, there was this whole scenario, sanitization happened, the machines were sent out. They kind of reflected the value of always human, and these were the people behind that, right? So I think connecting with the value and story, to Tom's point, I think that's a very powerful way of leveraging recognition, and especially during tough times. It's going to happen again and again. Today it's tariffs, tomorrow we don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be cyclical. It's always going to be like that. Mm-hmm. I think the second portion, which a lot of times we don't talk about, is we should make it very choiceful. And while we look at recognition as, I would clap for everybody, that's not something which we should stop. We got to clap for everybody, cheerlead everyone, because everyone is going to do something to get us there. There's going to be one good thing about everybody every single day. I'm pretty sure about it. But who are those 5% and who are those 10% who are actually going to transform things? And I think those recognitions, I'll be very choiceful. And a lot of times I've seen we tend to go the other way around, and we make it more like a democratic process where we have like 20 people, 25 people in one team getting recognized. And sometimes even the people are wondering, hey, what did I really do that big to be, to be part of that, the team, right? So I think that the dilution part of it is where we need to be very careful. Because every time you recognize 10, very clearly, there are a lot of people who get demoralized as well, right? That's human behavior. Yeah. That's how it works many a times, right? If I have not got it, I start questioning, hey, am I good enough or not, right? So you don't want to go in that direction. You really want to be very objective, have a certain number in your mind, a certain broader percentage, clap for everyone, but I'm very sure, make it choiceful. Connect with stories. I think that works the best because I think people start imbibing values much better.
Yeah. I really love the points that both of you brought up around it. I almost think, sometimes we as organizations, I think of it as like we're playing a sport together, right? And also, sometimes we're on the bench kind of watching the other play, our other team members play, or, we've also got people around us who are in the stands. And, throughout a game, we cheer each other on, right? We recognize that excellent pass, that great bowl, whatever it is, right? Whichever sport you're playing. And then we cheer for the entire team at the end, right? So there's kind of these interim things. And wouldn't it be weird? And sometimes a lot of organizations wait till the end, till we finish something, to cheer. So imagine going to your favorite sporting event and there being no noise, no cheering, no booing, no whatever it is for the entire game until the very end. That would be weird. And a lot of times we do that, right? So how can we help people even kind of put it into some practical terms to say, like, what all of us like to have kind of that be recognized, feel like that we're doing something of value, that we belong, and that we're seen, right? So that's, to me, is like what you're talking about is like, how do we make sure that that's done? And the how, the values, and the what, the impact, right? They're both really, really important in this.
Yeah. And if I may just take 5 seconds to add one very quick point is be very clear in differentiating between real time and aspirational recognition. Yeah. Right? So real time meaning the claps have to be maybe an online system, a gift card. There are a lot of ways to do it immediately, right? Even in Teams, you have a lot of options to recognize people. So that real time piece works the best. And aspirational meaning year down the line, I know that, hey, these are my top awards, or these are the Hall of Fame, or whatever you may want to call it, which I aspire for. And that linkage has to be somewhere with the values to say that what will it take to get there? And, people imagining and kind of creatively visualizing themselves as standing on the podium a year down the year to say that, will I get this or not? I think a mix of both the things should work. And I think the rules are same, whether a tough situation or a normal situation. The recognition is a very big steam engine.
Yeah, great. All right, so we're about at that time, folks. So I'm going to ask the two of you just, as we kind of wrap up here, if you could give kind of one actionable piece of advice to HR leaders that are struggling to keep their workforces engaged with these complex geo-economic situations, what would it be? I'll let whoever jump in first.
Okay, I'll start. So the two areas I've been focused on, and I've been having a lot of conversations recently with leaders, not just HR leaders, but just folks leading various size companies. I think trust is a big deal in the workforce today. And with deep fakes and the political polarization and a lot of things that are going on, the tariff issues, with the workforce willingness and ability to trust their leadership and therefore the organization is not what it was a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And so you need to hardwire into your organization mechanisms to create that trust. And certainly rewards and recognition is a piece of that. There's an opportunity to develop trust contracts. There's a book called The Trust Transformation that was written by an ED physician, Elmira Mansfield, and her partner, Roy Reed, in the book, who is a marketing consultant. Fantastic book, but I think trust is number one. The second thing is, we didn't talk a lot about it today, but is this AI disruption. You need to be thinking now about how agentic AI is going to shift and change your workforce, because it has a direct impact on all the things we've talked about today. So be on the leading edge, and the leading edge isn't just using ChatGPT, to be able to respond to emails or write business plans. Agentic AI goes way beyond that. So the sooner as leaders we can get comfortable with it and start to understand the implications of it for the areas over which we have oversight. Those two things can work together to actually build trust and create a place in an environment where people want to come to work, they're excited about the mission, and they have resilience around all of this disruption.
Great, got it.
I wish there was a playbook, but I would say there's no one answer from my side. I would say policies, the days are gone. I think it's about principles, and if the companies can now start thinking more on principles, because things are going to be so dynamic, right? The policy of yesterday will not work 2 years down, year down. Things will change. Hybrid work, nobody thought of that during COVID, right?
Yeah.
Work from home. Now getting people back is a separate policy in itself, right? So I think being very principle based to understand different parts of the organization, I think that's one word of advice I would have. And I think, though very underrated, I feel engagement surveys to do a deep dive, because I can say 10 things, those 10 things may not apply to one particular organization. Look at your optics of the organization on the Pulse surveys. What are your people talking about? And try and get into the detail of what is it that is not working and what is it that is working. And I think engagement surveys will give you a very good reflection. Pulse surveys will give a very good reflection of career challenges. It could be work challenges. It could be flexibility. It could be relationship with managers, growing organization, a lot of external talent coming in. So I think one word advice to me would be, what can you do to reinforce the trust in your culture? Because at the end of the day, nobody can copy that, right? Strategies can get copied, but the way they get executed is your culture. And that's not going to be a copy paste at all. So what is unique to you? How will you preserve that? How do you get to that information through your engagement surveys? And then be very pointed in solving those one or two things which will deliver 80-20 rule, as you call it, is my advice here.
Great. Well, Atuya and Tom, thank you both for taking your time and sharing your insights. The real world battle scars and victories that you have on the front lines of workforce transformation have been, really valuable. And I'm sure our listeners out there are kind of vastly, you may have seen me, I was jotting notes down. I'm sure people are jotting notes as they're saying here. And, you've really given some practical advice to kind of how people can rethink or redo some of their HR strategies and people strategies moving into the future. So I want to thank you again. And I want to ask everyone who's been listening to us or listens to us in the future to keep trying and working towards building resilient and engaged workforces. Again, thanks and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Atuya.
Yeah. Can you guys hang on? Because I think that there's something with the steam yard that they have to wait to have this.